August 3rd, day 3, chapter 3. Cry for help. A cry for help. It comes in as many different faces as there are faces that cry out. There is no absolute pattern. There is no way to know. Comments like they're just looking for attention, or it's a phase, or they'll grow out of it, they're young. My friends' kids used to struggle with that, but they're fine now. You have to let them figure it out on their own. Otherwise, they'll always be dependent on you. Let's keep this to ourselves. You don't want to be labeled as one of those kids. Some people would say a cry for help is nothing more than someone looking for attention. They are absolutely correct. The more important question is why? And then we need to keep asking the question why until we get to the answer. Maybe there's something going on that's so painful they can't talk. Maybe through their destructive, self-harming actions, someone will pay enough attention that they'll notice what's being inflicted on them by someone else. Maybe they know they need help, but don't have the strength to ask for it. Maybe it's easier if they just have a problem, so someone takes them to a professional. Oftentimes, a cry for help takes the form of something that is socially acceptable. Mason went through a phase, as many young men do, where he wanted to become as big and strong as he possibly could. Following in the footsteps of his father, he used some enhancements to accelerate his gains. I remember his excitement when I told him I would go to the gym with him. It was shoulder day, and he took 95-pound dumbbells in each hand and did seated shoulder press. I kept telling him it was too much weight, that he didn't want to mess up his shoulders. But through my instruction, he fed off my excitement over his accomplishments. When I said, "Mason, this is more weight than I've ever done in this movement," it gave him such a sense of pride. There's nothing wrong with achieving physical milestones as long as it's not where your identity comes from. If your identity is based on your appearance or worldly accomplishments, you're always left wanting more, and there will always be another cry for help. Because I was unaware of the pain and suffering, the absolute torture that was going on in Mason's mind, and more importantly in his heart, I did not see his obvious cries for help. I remember the winter before he died. Mason and I were staying with good friends of ours in McCall at a cabin that they had rented. A weekend ski trip, one of our favorite activities. There was a hot tub at the property, and in typical Mason fashion, he was doing backflips off objects into the snow and splitting his time between the hot tub and laying in piles of fluffy powder staring up at the stars. He found peace doing extreme tests of physical and mental ability. I related with that. And instead of being concerned, I promoted it like a badge of honor. He could do front flips and back flips on the flat ground and off any object at any height into any body of water. He would jump into ice-cold rivers, regardless of the temperature outside. And this night was no different. Walking around in nothing but swimming trunks, with the temperatures dipping close to zero, he thrived in an environment where he knew no one else was willing to go. I remember looking at my son that night with such pride, the ability to do things that others would say are impossible. Todd and Michelle Point, some of my dearest friends, had shared their cabin for the weekend and treated Mason like one of their own children. As I sat there bragging about how awesome my son was and admiring the physique he had built, Michelle asked me a simple question. She said, "How did Mason get all those scars on his chest?" Without taking a second glance, I simply replied, "They're stretch marks from how fast his muscles have grown." Michelle looked at me, and I don't remember the exact words she said, or if she said anything at all. But what she communicated was, "Those aren't stretch marks. That is definitely something else." I don't remember if it was later that night or in the days to follow. I asked Mason and had him show me his chest. They were definitely not stretch marks. They were scars where his chest had been cut open. Before I could ask Mace what happened, he calmly looked at me and said, "I got wasted the other night camping with my buddies, and I took a knife and cut lines into my chest." I think my response was something to the effect of, "Awesome. I think they look really cool." I can't believe I brushed that off as just normal activity. The reality is, it sounded like something that I would have done on any given night for no other reason than I could. I was at a celebration of life the other day for one of my good friends' mothers. One of my college buddies and lifetime friends reminded me of a story from when I was a young man. One where, under the heavy influence of drugs and alcohol, I continually ran into the forest and then back to the fire. At one point, I thought I was an animal and was gone for quite some time. I'd become tangled in a barbed wire fence. I felt like I was stuck for hours. I spent most of the next day tending to wounds where much of my body had been cut open. At the time, it was just another story, another thing that I could be known for. Anything other than to be considered normal. I had to be different. I believe Mason had a crisis of identity because his father had a crisis of identity. It must have been so difficult for Mason to hear people that knew me. They would talk about me in such high regard. In his world, he probably didn't know who they were talking about. That wasn't the Michael Evans he knew. I was the person I was supposed to be to him, to everyone else. Children are the smartest, most intelligent, and most in tune. Their frequency and their vibrations have not been altered or polluted or dumbed down. When small children cry out for help and they're told to be quiet, small children just want their parents and they're told to toughen up or to figure it out. When small children just need to be held instead of dropped off. When small children associate love with time spent and you never have enough time. Mason was 3 years old when his mother and I got divorced. His cries for help began at 3 years old. As I stated before, I am forgiven and I have forgiven myself. So I don't say these things with a victim mentality or someone who is still stuck trying to deal with myself. I make the following statement, not from a place of shame or defeat, but from a place of truth. People need to know that their actions have consequences. Your job as a parent is not only the most important, but there is a vulnerable, innocent child that depends on you. The story I told myself and many around me was that Mason's mother or family tried to keep him from me. The reality is, I could have had 50-50 custody. I could have had my son 50% of the time. I'm not suggesting that that would have been better for Mason. I'm just telling you that I had the option, and I passed. Though much of Mason's childhood, my parents and family had Mason as much as I did, and what a blessing that was for him. I've come to the realization that most of my life was spent in a manic state where I was pulled back and forth by my own desires and would split time between extreme selfishness and extreme service to others, spending no time in a healthy medium. The reality is that Mason's mother always took the opportunity to keep Mason, and even though I was always around and never missed his events or school activities, I should have had him take precedence over all the things in my life that I became known for. I put myself above my son, and he knew it. There was always time to make money, to go on a trip, or to take advantage of an adventure, but you never get a single day back with your child. 18 years goes by in the blink of an eye, and you will never regret a day you said no to someone else and said yes to your children. Mason's love for fishing is well known, and I have told the following story many times. in an attempt for people to understand how much that boy loved to fish. He was small, somewhere between the age of 3 and 5. We had gone fishing all day, we had put in the work, and we had struck out. It was one of the few times we never caught a fish or even had a bite. We were getting close to the truck on our walk back along the river. We had to cross an extremely swampy, kind of tricky area. I picked Mason up and he clung onto the front of me, tight with his legs and arms wrapped around me. He knew the drill. We had been doing this from the time he was born. He held on to me, I held on to everything else as we began to cross the water. My foot slipped, and before I could even react, we were in the river under the water. There was no panic and there was no fear. I simply got my bearings and stood up, still holding our gear and my boy still holding me. We had gone completely underwater. I had fallen on top of him, but he knew that if I wasn't freaking out, there was nothing to be scared of. Once we got across the water, I started to apologize. I'm so sorry, I can't believe I fell on top of you. He looked at me and said, I'd rather go fishing with you all day and catch nothing than do anything else. I now realize that yes, he loved fishing, but what he really loved was time with his father. Mason, thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for loving me. And I am so sorry that I did not hear your cries for help. I love you.